A man cuts a mouse into 8 pieces and then sews them back together with a needle. Not only does the mouse still live, but its blood vessels are also perfectly intact. The director of the hospital watches in amazement because this is not just a simple matter of sewing flesh together, it also requires sewing 6 to 8 stitches on the severed blood vessels, with too few stitches causing leakage and too many hindering blood circulation. The number of people in the province's top hospitals who can do this can be counted on one hand. However, Ling Ran is just an intern who has been in the hospital for 1 day. Under normal circumstances, interns can only practice on bananas, so they would be too nervous to make their first incision on flesh, just like the dozens of students behind him. Therefore, the director concludes that he has interned at another hospital. Ling Ran quickly explains that it was just a small clinic at home, but in reality, it was a newcomer gift from the medical system. With such a dazzling performance, the head of the medical teaching department asks him which department he would like to rotate to next. The other interns are shocked because the hospital is extremely strict with newcomers. Even doctoral and graduate students don't have the privilege to choose their own departments. Before Ling Ran can make a decision, the system suddenly issues a task, to suture the wounds of 10 patients, with the reward being an intermittent vertical interim suturing technique. Having tasted the sweetness of the system, Ling Ran doesn't want to miss this task, so he decisively chooses the emergency department. Only there can he come into contact with more patients. His roommates all feel sorry for him, wondering why he chose such a tiring department. Only the director looks at him with approving eyes. What he doesn't expect, however, is that upon arriving at the emergency department, all the interns are thrown into the break room. Not only that, but there are also several resident doctors waiting to sneak into surgeries and gain experience before the allocation. There is no chance for them. 2 hours later, a nurse suddenly rushes in and asks, "Who here can suture?" All the interns shout out, but only Ling Ran stands there calmly, making him stand out even more. As a result, the nurse picks him. Thinking he can finally get hands-on experience, he is instead called to do odd jobs, such as cleaning wounds and administering anesthesia. After a few suturing surgeries, Ling Ran sees that the chief surgeon is a bit tired, so he tentatively asks Dr. Zhou, "Can I finish the suturing?" Dr. Zhou doesn't refuse, as suturing is quite simple, and there is generally no problem during the surgery. It also gives him a chance to rest. However, just 2 minutes after closing his eyes, Ling Ran has already finished the suturing. Dr. Zhou wakes up instantly, "Kid, don't just stitch randomly to be fast." But when he sees the patient, he instantly shuts up. He has been in the emergency department for many years, but he has never seen anyone who can suture so quickly and perfectly. He can't help but wonder if this kid is a master from some local hospital, coming here to gain experience. Just as he is lost in thought, a nurse enters with a crying tone. "Dr. Zhou, a patient in bed 3 is asking for you." It turns out to be a gang leader with a broken head in need of suturing, surrounded by a group of burly gang members. Dr. Zhou is so scared that he cannot even hold the forceps steady. So, he looks at Ling Ran, "Why don't you do the suturing? It's a great opportunity." Ling Ran, of course, will not refuse. He immediately takes the tools and is about to get to work. But the gang leader is not pleased, "Bringing a young kid like this to fool us. If the suturing isn't done well, your hospital can forget about staying open." Unexpectedly, before he can finish speaking, Dr. Zhou points behind him, "Your wound has been sutured, and it's done perfectly." The gang leader is shown his sutures in a mirror, and he can't help but exclaim, "This stitching is even faster than being cut, and I don't feel a thing. We'll come to you for any issues in the future." He leaves without even bandaging the wound, taking his gang members to seek revenge. In less than an hour, they return with another injured person, specifically requesting the intern to do the suturing. The wound is on a tattoo that holds special meaning for the man, and he asks Ling Ran to restore it to its original state. Ling Ran slows down his movements and stitches the wound more carefully. At that moment, a resident doctor who wants to gain some surgical experience doesn't recognize Ling Ran as a new intern and is annoyed. How could an intern perform surgery alone? However, the moment he sees the suturing, he is astounded. The stitches look as if they were drawn on. He quickly apologizes, "Dr. Lin, I thought you were an intern too, but you must be a part-time doctor." Ling Ran shakes his head, "I am just an intern." The resident doctor doesn't dare to treat him as an intern anymore and gives up several suturing opportunities to him. That afternoon, Ling Ran completes his novice task, and he is in a great mood on his way home. Upon returning to his family's small clinic, he is immediately urged by his father to finish his internship and return to help. Because he hasn't inherited the medical skills of the previous generation, he has to hire a doctor surnamed Xiong. However, Dr. Xiong keeps demanding a raise, and the clinic's income can barely cover the expenses. Just as Ling Ran is about to appease his father, a man suddenly rushes in. It turns out to be Mr. Yang, the owner of the knife shop next door, who has accidentally cut his hand. Dr. Xiong hurriedly examines the wound and shakes his head. "You should go to the hospital. There's nothing I can do." Ling Ran puts on his white coat and says, "It's just a cut, not too severe. Let me handle it." Just then, the system issues a new task: treat Mr. Yang's hand and achieve satisfactory results. The reward is a beginner's treasure chest. Dr. Xiong thinks Ling Ran is showing off and says, "Lin, you're just an intern. Don't interfere. Let me disinfect the wound and then send him to the hospital." But as he speaks, Ling Ran has already prepared the surgical equipment and is comforting Mr. Yang. After cleaning the wound, he applies anesthetic, warning Mr. Yang that it might hurt a bit. He then has Zhuanzi, the only nurse in the clinic, help with the procedure. Mr. Yang's hand has been injured to the point of damaging his tendons, and if the suturing isn't done well, he will be unable to use his hand for the rest of his life. This is a challenge for Ling Ran. Finally, after about 10 minutes, the surgery is successfully completed, and the onlookers in the clinic can't help but admire the beautiful suturing. However, Dr. Xiong stands there, stunned. As a professional, he knows very well that even after graduating from an internship, working in a hospital for 2 years as a trainee, and then 2 more years as a resident doctor, one may not necessarily achieve this level of suturing skill. Ling Ran initially thought that the system task would be completed easily, but Mr. Yang's son suddenly storms in. Seeing that the wound has been bandaged, he doesn't express gratitude but instead curses at Ling Ran. "How dare a lousy clinic like yours perform surgery? If my dad's hand doesn't recover, you can expect a lawsuit." Ling Ran calmly explains that there is a possibility that the hand may not recover, but the chances are low. "As a doctor, I have the ability to handle such a wound. I can't just let your father bleed continuously." However, the younger Yang is still ungrateful and insists on taking his father to the hospital for a checkup. Ling Ran glances at his system task and, as expected, the beginner's treasure chest that was within reach is now gone. He has no choice but to wait for them to go to the hospital and finish their examination. After sending off the young father and son, Lin's father is about to close the clinic when a girl suddenly appears at the entrance. He explains that the clinic's doctor is off duty and suggests going to the hospital if she is ill. Surprisingly, the girl is looking for Ling Ran. Her name is Lu Junling, the sister of the tattooed man. She has come to thank Ling Ran for his help and has brought a fresh salmon as a gift. Initially, she planned to leave after delivering the salmon, but after seeing Ling Ran's handsome and sunny appearance, she can't bring herself to leave. She insists on personally preparing a salmon sashimi dish. Ling Ran's family tastes it and finds it much more delicious than what's available in the market. It turns out that most of the salmon in Yunhua City is controlled by the Confucian families, making it fresher than the imported products found in the market. Just as Ling Ran is enjoying his meal, the shouting of the young father and son can be heard outside again. The man practices suturing 100 bananas every day, and finally becomes skilled enough to suture human wounds. Although the sutured wound looks perfect, the patient's family is terrified and scolds Ling Ran, "You, who practiced on bananas, dare to perform surgery. If my hand is ruined, you better prepare for a lawsuit." They then take the father to the largest hospital in the province, Yunhua Hospital, for a checkup. Little do they know, Ling Ran is an intern at Yunhua Hospital, and his suturing skills are among the best in the entire hospital. Sure enough, 2 hours later, the father and son return, because even the experts at Yunhua Hospital praise the perfectly sutured wound. To apologize, they even specially made a banner for Ling Ran. Ling Ba is overjoyed and decides to let Ling Ran work as the consulting doctor at their clinic starting tomorrow. This scares Ling Ran, who runs back to the hospital the next morning. This is because his current system tasks are becoming more and more difficult, and there are too few patients at the small clinic to complete them. For example, today's task is to complete 10 treatments to receive a beginner's treasure chest. But as an intern at the hospital, he usually can't access that many patients. Just as he is worried, a nurse suddenly rushes in and tells all the resident doctors to gather outside, and Ling Ran is called as well. It turns out that there has been an explosion at a suburban factory, and many injured people will be sent to the hospital. They immediately notify the Deputy Chief of Emergency Department, Song-jun, to lead the rescue team. At first, only resident doctors are called, but Dr. Zhou specifically asks Ling Ran to assist, otherwise, interns would not be allowed to participate. Soon, a large number of injured people flood into the hospital. The severely injured patients are arranged in a rescue room, while Dr. Zhou is only responsible for suturing wounds of those with minor injuries. However, the constant flow of injured people quickly overwhelms him, and he has to assign a patient to Ling Ran. The patient has a leg injury with a series of unevenly deep wounds that need to be sutured using different methods. In less than 10 minutes, Ling Ran has completed the suturing. Dr. Zhou, still somewhat uneasy, hurriedly checks the work. Seeing the perfectly sutured wounds, he is amazed, but his expression scares the patient who thinks there must be a problem with the suturing. Dr. Zhou quickly explains that the suturing is excellent and could be used as a teaching example for interns. He instructs the nurse to take a few photos for a case study, and then lets Ling Ran suture on his own, without following him. However, he absolutely cannot find patients on his own, they must be called through a nurse. Ling Ran is puzzled, wouldn't this just increase the workload of the nurses? Dr. Zhou immediately explains with a serious face that, under normal circumstances, the number of injured people in such public accidents is usually very high, so they may not be able to receive treatment in a short time. If he indiscriminately chooses patients to treat, he would be surrounded by them within 3 minutes, which would disrupt the order and slow down the treatment process. Ling Ran has no choice but to sit in front of the hospital bed and wait for the nurse to bring patients. One by one, the patients are brought in, and with a separate operating space, Ling Ran quickly completes 10 treatments. He eagerly opens the rewarded beginner's treasure chest, but just like last time, it contains only energy. Does he need to open more chests to get better items? But there isn't much time left. In order to speed up the process, Ling Ran suggests involving his roommate, who is also an intern, to help. They would divide the wound treatment into 3 stages: cleaning, suturing, and bandaging. Dr. Zhou assumes Ling Ran wants to give his roommate an opportunity to gain hands-on experience and does not object. However, to their surprise, the collaboration between the 3 of them is like an assembly line, speeding up the treatment process by more than twice the rate. The nurses calling patients one by one end up wasting more time. So, they simply let the patients line up at the door and treat them one after another. Soon, more than 2 hours pass, and the injured patients who were brought in have almost all been treated. Yet, Ling Ran doesn't want to leave work yet, as he is just 2 patients away from opening 4 treasure chests. While he is waiting in the break room for more patients, Lu Jingling suddenly calls. Ling Ran subconsciously assumes her brother has been injured again, so he asks her to explain that he hasn't, and wonders if her brother has injured someone else or if she is injured herself. Upon hearing this, Lu Jingling's face turns red. Is he concerned about her? How should she respond? As a result, she instinctively blurts out, "Someone here is injured, and I want to ask for your help." She then looks at a younger member sitting nearby eating noodles, who is confused, asking, "When did any of us get injured?" In order to pursue the intern doctor, the young lady from the underworld has her 108 minions beaten up and bloodied every day, then personally drives 50 of them to the hospital, specifically requesting Ling Ran to stitch up their wounds. With Lu Jingling's enthusiastic help, Ling Ran quickly completes the system's beginner tasks. What he doesn't know is that his overnight record of treating 50 patients has spread throughout the hospital, and it soon reaches the ears of the deputy director of the emergency department, Song-jun. Recently, surgical doctors have been overly greedy and eager for work. Song-jun plans to reprimand them, but when he sees Ling Ran stitching wounds with standard movements and techniques, he is impressed. This is a basic quality for an experienced doctor, but quite rare for an intern who has only learned from textbooks, as patients' wounds can vary greatly and are almost impossible to stitch according to the book. Considering Ling Ran has been working for more than 10 hours straight and is still efficient, calling him a genius wouldn't be an exaggeration. Director Hua's anger dissipates, and he doesn't make things difficult for Ling Ran. Instead, he instructs Dr. Zhou to check on the patient's suture removal and medication changes. If everything is fine, Ling Ran will be allowed to observe surgeries for a day. Everyone is stunned. For an intern to be in the operating room, isn't that like winning the lottery? However, Ling Ran's attention isn't on this, as the system has given him an unexpected reward for achieving 50 consecutive suturing achievements, an ultimate treasure chest. After work, Ling Ran eagerly opens the chest, revealing a skill book that can upgrade a basic skill to a perfect level. According to the system, skills are divided into specialization, mastery, and perfection. His current suturing skill is at mastery level, making him one of the top talents in Yunhua Hospital. If he upgrades to perfection, there probably won't be many who can compete with him in the entire province. However, using the skill book on suturing seems wasteful, so he decides to upgrade something else. Upon checking the options, he finds they are all basic surgical procedures. Nevertheless, if a surgeon masters all 6 basic operations, they would be considered a renowned doctor. Ling Ran chooses the hemostasis skill, which is currently the most useful. Surprisingly, there are 4 sub-options. Since he's in the emergency department, the best choice is manual hemostasis. Although the skill has been upgraded to perfection, Ling Ran still practices repeatedly in his mind and unwittingly falls asleep. As a result, he oversleeps the next day and almost misses the rounds organized by Director Hua. Although the director doesn't say anything, the first room he checks is Ling Ran's patient. Ling Ran quickly introduces the patient's condition, a 19-year-old female with no past medical issues who fell on stairs, causing a large tear in her elbow. Ling Ran chose a 0.15 mm diameter thread to avoid large scars. After suturing, the knot is raised, serving as a buffer before scar formation. However, the patient has skin defects, so the knot cannot be too tight to avoid compromising the blood circulation around the wound. The doctors behind Director Hua applaud, and Director Hua nods in satisfaction, asking everyone if they understood. After finishing his explanation, Director Hua's expression changes, saying, "It's good that you understand." However, no one is allowed to learn this method to cover scars. There are many ways to hide scars, such as wearing long sleeves or using tattoos. But as doctors, our primary concern should be treatment, not aesthetics. Ling Ran dares to do this because he is skilled and courageous. Those of you who lack skill should focus on suturing the wound first. Hearing this, the girl can't help but cast a grateful glance at Ling Ran. The system immediately unlocks an achievement for receiving the patient's gratitude, rewarding him with a beginner-level treasure chest. Soon after the rounds end and everyone is preparing to return to the break room, a nurse suddenly receives a notice that a car accident victim needs emergency treatment. Director Hua immediately turns towards the operating room, coincidentally bumping into the attending doctor who is reporting the patient's condition. The patient has a 20 cm open wound in the abdomen, a significant displacement of the left rib, and bleeding that requires blood transfusion. Through the report, Ling Ran quickly assesses that the patient's vital signs are relatively stable, and it is only a level 2 critical case, which should not be difficult to rescue. However, as Director Hua is talking with the patient's family, an unexpected problem occurs. The patient's bleeding can't be stopped, even after injecting blood coagulant. It is unclear whether an abdominal examination is necessary, but no one dares to confirm that the source of bleeding is in the abdomen. If they make a mistake, the patient would suffer from 2 incisions. Just as the director is making a decision, the patient suddenly goes into shock, and any further delay could be fatal. Without any hesitation, Ling Ran reaches directly into the patient's wound. The intern doctor, on his first time in the operating room, inserts his hand into the patient's body, shocking the doctors present who think he's attempting murder. Little do they know that Ling Ran is actually using a bare-handed technique to press on the wound on the patient's liver. The patient has lost too much blood and is in mortal danger, but no one can find the wound. As Ling Ran's hand goes in, the machines quickly show that the bleeding has stopped. Director Hua decisively instructs Ling Ran to maintain his position while the others perform the surgery. Thus, Ling Ran acts as a human hemostat for 2 full hours. When the surgery is completed, his hand is numb. Instead of praising him, Director Hua questions how Ling Ran knew the bleeding was coming from the liver. Ling Ran confidently answers that with the exposed abdomen and no apparent blood flow, he could only determine the location through blood vessels. Director Hua is astonished. Not only is Ling Ran's adaptability strong, but his knowledge is also on par with top-level doctors. He's a genius. However, on the surface, he still sternly asks where Ling Ran learned the technique. Ling Ran reluctantly uses his own family's clinic as an excuse, not wanting to reveal that it was a skill granted by the system. As they speak, Director Hua examines the liver and finds no damage after being held for 2 hours. It turns out Ling Ran had used the inner side of the second joint of his pinky to stop the bleeding, and then weakly controlled the liver, preventing it from shifting and causing secondary damage. Hearing Ling Ran's seamless explanation, Director Hua has no objections, admitting that he himself would have difficulty performing this technique. So he assigns the postoperative work to Ling Ran's assistant. The doctors are astonished. They had only qualified to perform postoperative work after a year of formal employment, and they were so nervous that their hands shook. But Ling Ran is incredibly calm, with mature and experienced techniques, layer by layer suturing without any hesitation. The postoperative work is quickly completed, and the assistant doctor watches in awe, wondering if this is the legendary talent. Just as he is about to lament the unfairness, he suddenly realizes he can write a paper using the records of this surgery, which will surely make a name for himself. Director Hua suddenly asks Ling Ran if he can write a paper, starting with countless bare-handed hemostasis techniques, and provide him with an outline. Before Ling Ran can answer, the system issues a task: complete a paper and be rewarded with a final-level treasure chest. Ling Ran is overjoyed, knowing he must get this treasure chest. After leaving the operating room and planning to rest, he enters the office only to find all his colleagues staring at him, then hiding away as if they've seen a ghost. It turns out that the video of Ling Ran performing the bare-handed hemostasis was uploaded online by the patient's family. His colleagues admit he is strong, but if he fails, it would not only disgrace his reputation but also affect those around him. Thus, they are all afraid to work with Ling Ran. However, this doesn't deter many patients from coming in search of his expertise. The video's comments section is filled with praise, nearly elevating him to the status of a miracle doctor. Yet, the top comment is a lengthy negative review. As a doctor who has worked on the front lines of medicine for years, this is one of the most reckless acts I've ever seen. Performing bare-handed hemostasis without surgical vision is a feat that only a few doctors in the country dare to attempt, as a single mistake could lead to a medical accident. The comment is accompanied by the signature of Dr. Chi Zhenhai, a medical expert at the provincial hospital. Ling Ran has heard of him, as he holds significant influence throughout the Jiangxi province. It is then that Ling Ran realizes that Director Hua urgently asked him to write a paper so that he could establish himself in the medical field through a high-quality publication. In the medical community, papers serve not only as personal profiles but also as valuable weapons for attacking and defending oneself. So after work, Ling Ran immediately heads to the library to prepare his paper, even consuming several bottles of energy potions for the task. By early morning the next day, he hands the paper outline to Director Hua. Finishing it in just one day, Director Hua initially thinks Ling Ran is bluffing but finds the paper to be comprehensive and well organized, even featuring an additional chapter. The paper discusses the bleeding points and judgments in countless wild settings, not only justifying Ling Ran's previous operation but also elevating the paper's level. As a result, Director Hua assigns the task of finalizing the paper to Deputy Director Du, the department's expert in writing papers. However, unbeknownst to Ling Ran, the expert Chi Zhenhai who criticized him in the video's comments has already decided to confront him personally. The incident quickly spreads online, and netizens praise him as a miracle doctor. However, instead of receiving any praise at the hospital, Ling Ran faces the risk of being fired. The instigator is Chi Zhenhai, an expert from the provincial hospital. Chi Zhenhai has always been at odds with Yunhua Hospital and uses Ling Ran's unconventional bare-handed hemostasis as an excuse to hold a grudge. To defend Ling Ran, Director Hua seeks a consultation from Director Lu of the Army General Hospital. Director Hua, however, doesn't reveal his intentions right away, instead discussing the injured workers from a recent factory explosion. Most of the victims are not seriously injured, but 2 critical patients with 80% burns need long-term hospitalization. Director Lu suggests that a younger doctor should be in charge of their care, as the older doctors might not be able to handle the long-term commitment. As Director Lu prepares to leave, Director Hua reminds him of Ling Ran's case and shows him the video of the bare-handed hemostasis. Director Lu is astonished by Ling Ran's skill, but he is annoyed that the video is cut short. Director Hua explains that the video was recorded by a patient's family member using a cell phone, and they can record more footage in the future since the protagonist is at their hospital. He then shows Chi Jinhai's comment, to which Chi Jinhai coldly responds, "Did I say anything wrong?" Performing hemostasis without visual guidance is indeed a risk to the patient's life, but Director Hua doesn't immediately argue. Instead, he has Ling Ran present his paper on bare-handed hemostasis to Director Lu and Chi Jinhai. After reading the paper, Chi Jinhai tries to change the subject and argues that allowing an intern to perform such a risky procedure could lead to medical accidents. The two start arguing and are close to fighting when Director Lu intervenes, suggesting that the paper's author should speak for himself. Chi Jinhai smirks, ready to confront the inexperienced intern. He asks Ling Ran two questions: 1. How confident is he in performing the procedure, and 2. Has he considered the consequences of failure? Without hesitation, Ling Ran answers that failure could result in the patient's death, unknowingly falling into Chi Jinhai's trap. Chi Jinhai asks if Ling Ran would still perform the procedure knowing the severe consequences, and Ling Ran replies with 2 words, "Yes, I would." Chi Jinhai laughs, claiming that Ling Ran is admitting to medical malpractice. However, Ling Ran remains calm, stating that no accident has occurred. Chi Jinhai is rendered speechless, as he has never encountered an intern who dared to talk back. Soon, Chi Jinhai calms down and tries a different approach. He asks Ling Ran if he has considered that failure could ruin his promising career. Or maybe someone is forcing you to do it. Director Lu is taken aback, as this is a loaded question. If Ling Ran says he is willing to sacrifice himself to save the patient, it implies recklessness. If he says someone is forcing him, it implicates Director Hua. Surprisingly, Ling Ran doesn't choose either option but focuses on the patient's perspective. He says that performing bare-handed hemostasis is the best option for the patient at the time, which brings a relieved smile to Director Lu's face. Medical procedures are important, but the patient's well-being should always be the priority. Chi Jinhai, infuriated and embarrassed, starts cursing and disregards medical procedures. He says that Ling Ran won't last long as a doctor, as a single medical accident could end a doctor's career. However, Ling Ran interrupts him, stating that doctors are like human cells, protecting the body and fighting off viruses. If a cell loses its original function for the sake of long-term survival, doesn't it become a cancer cell? Chi Jinhai is left sweating, as Ling Ran's words imply that he is a harmful presence, but he can't find a way to refute the claim. Angrily, he leaves the room with a slamming door. Ling Ran's performance pleases Director Hua, who rewards him with an on-call shift the next day. Ling Ran is overjoyed, not realizing that the on-call duty is a trap.